Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to do an album review today. We check out a whole album. You guys know how long this is. I don't, but we're probably looking at about 3.5 to 4 hour video, primarily just because of the sheer length of this album. It's not super long, but it is over an hour, and that is concocted of only 8 songs, and one of them is a 1-minute intro. So we're averaging about 9 minutes per track here, and I wager probably going to have a lot to say about some of these songs. So I'm thinking we're going to have a longer video here. Like I said though, you guys in the future, you already know how long this video is. So let's dive into this. Our album is Mounds and Grave Mistakes. Our band is A Forest of Stars. Unless there's anything that really stands out to me on this intro, we're probably going to roll it right into our second track, which is Precipice Pirouette at over 10 minutes long. So let's dive into this, see what's going on. Really hitting that dark tone. Very spacious, very moody. Tons of compression and overdrive on the reverberation. Hear how it's warm and very full after you've actually strummed. And a very slow 3. Yeah, I love the chimes, bells of some sort. Very theatrical. We've also moved to a black metal production. His vocal style is ridiculous. The delays in the vocals, just allowing that space to fill with anticipation. tension in that chord. This does not let up at all. Finally, some release here. Yes, really nice counterpoint there on the bass for a moment. So many moving lines. This part is gorgeous. Alright, we have a little ritardando going on here. Not what I thought we were going for there. That was some very fun vocalization. Oh, but those dancing cymbals? Yeah, they're sticking outside of the three just a little bit. Oh, those rolls are very clean though. We've shifted away from the double bass kicks just for this. Oh, I'm bringing it all together. We've got the drive and the bite from the black metal section, but we've incorporated some melody from our folkier section. Really nice tom roll, or tom fill there. Tons of dissonance, really digging into some very tense ideas. Oh, jeez. Those vocals are insane. Next we have a triplet idea within 4/4, kind of giving us some polyrhythmic ideas there. Sounds like it's going to go straight into our next track there. This is quite the introduction to the album. I don't think I've taken so many notes on an opening track yet. I have pretty much filled up this entire area over here in just one song. I'm kind of hoping the rest of the track follows along with similar ideas, because I'm going to run out of space real quick for these notes if we see a lot of variety through this album. So, lots of stuff to talk about. I want to touch on Persistence Is All first, because I think this is an interesting track that, at least retrospectively, that's the word I want, retrospectively foreshadows what we're about to hear, even though I wasn't aware of it at the time. You see, we start off with these guitar strums that dance around some dark, moody, and tense dissonant chords. What's really interesting about it is that the darkness tends to be a swelling aspect. We start off with just the strumming of the guitar, and as it resonates and reverberates, it becomes larger and wider and more distorted and overdriven and compressed and deeper. We begin to cut off the high end and only showcase the low end. This is the sound that we end up hearing a majority of for our guitars in the second track. So we have the clean guitars, we have the gritty guitars, we have this nice transformation. We're showing both sides of this. And actually that transformation, I wonder if that's something that's going to pop up. Well, I'll keep it in the back of my mind. Moving between two ideas. It's not a note I've taken yet. I didn't really pick up on it until just now, but it is neat that we got to hear gradual movement between the two ideas rather than just the clean electric and the gritty electric. We have this spectrum of moving from one side to the next. We have a few of those, or a few bars. I think it's half of our intro, which is 50 seconds. We get a little bit of that, and we're slowly adding in more ideas here. We bring in a violin, I think. Actually, I think the bells were first. I don't know what kind of bells they were. They could have been hanging chimes. They could have been like a xylophone. Could have been a glockenspiel. Just anything that really has that sharp, accented strike to it that's pitched and bright. There's a lot of instruments I could kind of follow. Maybe not so much a xylophone. Anyway, it's somewhere in the bell family, that's for sure. It adds this brightness to the track that none of the other instruments really have. Our guitar kind of starts out with a brightness that eventually gets overshadowed as the EQ cuts off the top end and gives us just that low end rumble. But our violin and our other guitar that comes in, they kind of have a warmer, earthier tone to them. They're not as bright. So the bells here really stand out. And the guitar ends up taking a back seat to the 2 or 3 instruments we have here that create this beautiful moving idea. There's some counterpoint, there's foundational work, we have the guitar lying underneath everything, and this is something that we see twice, at least, in Precipice, where we transition just to the folk side and we get these really beautiful ideas full of counterpoint and foundational ideas and melodic movement and chordal structures. But then also at the end of the track, we get to hear this combination of the gritty guitars underneath this folk style of playing. So this is actually a really nice condensed idea of what we would hear in track 2. I don't know about the rest of the album. We'll get into that. But it does foreshadow pretty much everything that I want to talk about in the second track. Like I said, though, just compressed down into 100 seconds rather than 10 minutes. So that's really interesting. It captures the mood and the vibe and the feel and most of the compositional techniques that it presumably will be in the entire album in just a minute and a half. And you don't even really notice it. Just kind of is an intro. But yeah, fundamentally, it's very cool. All right. So this takes us into Precipice Pirouette. Oh, so much to say here. This is black metal. You guys just will not let me go. We had what, 2 weeks or 2 albums, not 2 weeks, 2 albums that weren't black metal, I think back to back, and you guys are like, nah, we gotta fix that. Let's get a black metal album in here. But it's also not. It's we're gonna have to see how the rest of the album goes. This track right here, Precipice Pirouette, sets me up to enjoy this. It utilizes black metal as an auxiliary function of a larger work. And I think that is phenomenal. This is sort of how I can approach black metal, and probably the closest to enjoying black metal I think that I'm going to get. And this is consistent across many of the reviews I've done of more avant-garde or progressive black metal stuff that we've listened to. Bands that take the blackened production and the tremolo picking and the double bass kicks and that raw driving energy and utilizes it as a backdrop for a different type of storytelling, whether that's melodic or multiple vocals or strings or folk music or whatever. The black metal aspect is not the focal point, it's the foundation. And that's what's happening here for the most part. We do have like a 4 or 5 minute opening. It was, felt like half the song of just black metal guitar. In fact, I think we had one single idea in the guitars and drums for at least the first 3.5 minutes. So, yes, there's definitely some elements in this track, probably in the rest of the album as well, that are just pure black metal, and I'm not as enthusiastic about them, but they work in contrast with what everything else is doing, as far as my bias goes. Um, so that black metal aspect, like I mentioned, is going to be harsher vocals, although these are not what I consider black metal vocals. They're close, but they feel kind of hardcore to me, kind of punkish, mixed with the black metal kind of that higher pitched, nasally, compressed, harsh. Something in the middle there. I don't know. It reminds me a little bit of Ashenspire. Is that right? I think that's right. Ashenspire. Um, but like some of that also ties into theatric. We'll touch on vocals in a little bit. Anyways, we have harsh vocals, constant tremolo picking from our guitars. Our bass is barely audible. However, it does come in a couple of times and has some beautiful lines. I kind of wish we could hear it more clearly more often. But when it does come around, I'm pretty excited to hear it. And there was one point I think where it provided its really nice counter line. I don't want to call it counterpoint because it was a very short melody, like 3 or 4 beats, and then it went back to not being able to be heard, or being, I don't know if I should say not being able to be heard, but I think just doing what it typically does in black metal, which is participate with everybody else. Everybody's playing eighth notes, so it plays eighth notes, and because of that, it just kind of gets lost in the mix. The guitars are also at the lower end; they're not playing anything higher pitched, so it just kind of gets clumped up into the wall of sound, which is something that black metal does very well. And then our drums are also double bass kicks, lots of snare hits, lots of cymbal hits, just kind of keeping that intensity up, the aggression, the constant attacks. There were a couple of moments where we got kind of a dancing cymbal thing going on alongside these really quick attacks. And I love that. It's something I talked about months ago when we checked out Umgwa's album, where the drummer's cymbals were just, I don't know what it is about this. It just works well. I don't know if it's because the bass kicks are so rigid and low end, and that's like what the drums are doing. Because otherwise, you got the snare, and they might be doing blast beats, but usually the snare is a bit slower, so we're getting less of it. We really get a lot of that rumble from our bass in the lower register. So then we have this higher register cymbal hit that's also bright, very different from that earthy boominess we're getting out of our bass kicks, and it's also syncopated. It's dancing. It has, it's not a strict, rigid, constant, equal distant notes. They have different lengths to them, and it creates this rhythmic syncopation, and it's just the tonal opposite and compositional opposite of what the bass kick is doing. And just the two of them together, I think it's just that stark contrast brings them together in such a beautiful way. And we hear that in here too. I don't know, black metal with lots of cymbal work. I need more of that. Although not necessarily black metal, just double bass kicks with fancy cymbal work. I need more of that, whether it's black metal or not. Um, so yeah, that's like our metal core. That's the core of our metal side. Is just a lot of attacks from all of our instruments and really getting that gritty low end. There's also a bit of compression and fuzz and distortion going on here. It has a huge bite to it. I find it very difficult to pick out the notes specifically in the guitars, but often, especially in the second half of the track, when we combine the folk and the black metal aspects, it kind of got drowned out by the melodies and well, actually the vocals kind of drowned it out a little bit too in the opening, the first 3 or 4 minutes. So yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's specifically designed, composed in a way for it to be catching my ear in a way where I can pick out the notes. I don't think the notes matter. I think it's all about that texture, right? It's to give it that gritty, fuzzy bite underneath whatever's supposed to be in the spotlight, whether that's violins or bells or acoustic guitars or vocals, whatever else. But it is interesting. This is one of those bands. All right, we'll touch into this. We'll move into production real quick. This is one of those bands that I think walks the line very well, where there is this compressed grittiness to the overall tone, but there's also a lot of clarity. And this really only applies to the metal instruments. The acoustic and folk instruments are just purely clear. There's not extra compression or fuzz put on them. Spatially, they're nice and spaced out. There's no wall of sound going on. It really just is the guitars, the bass, and the drums that have this unified sound. And I think that just goes on to solidify my idea that the metal aspect is a single entity. They're like a single instrument that works alongside everyone else. So when you have the folk instruments coming in and they have the lead, the metal band could be seen as a single instrument, gets pushed down, and they're the foundational instrument of the section. And the fact that they kind of come together in this wall of sound aspect and are typically EQ'd together. I don't ever hear the bass coming up if the guitars get pushed down. The band just, if the metal's in the background, every piece of the metal is in the background. So that's kind of interesting. They kind of look at the whole black metal thing as a singular entity to contrast against the other timbres, the vocals and the violins and everything else. Interesting. I'll have to think more about that while I'm listening and see how true that is. Because I think that the drums technically would have to have a separate EQing. I don't know. Like I said, I'm going to listen to that some more when we dig into some later works. But it's really interesting how we have this mix of clean and gritty and compressed versus wide production, not only just within the band, but also the larger instrumentation. Um, the vocal, man, the vocals. These are some gnarly vocals. They are just gritty, and there's tons of just fry crackle to them, but there's also speech. It feels like natural vocal cords. In a lot of sections, it actually feels like I'm being yelled at, or that the vocalist is yelling at someone, possibly into a void, because I don't know why black metal makes me think of static. Static makes me think of voids. Um, but yeah, so this vocalist is just laying it out there. Tons of air pressure, tons of volume, tons of width and power. And like I said, we have a compressed clean, I think. It's definitely pitched. Not the perceived pitch that we hear with traditional harshes, but I think there's actual vocal cord usage going on here. Um, so between that and the just gnarly compression that this dude's got, it is a wild, almost chaotic vocal style. It sounds like our narrator, our singer could um I don't know, could do anything. There's some moments when it kind of brings it back a little bit, brings it down, and kind of has a little bit of speaking line, um, and a little bit of clean singing in one line. I think a single line, a few just a few syllables of it, and then also just this full-on powerful yelling is what it sounds like to me, and everything in between. We hear a spectrum of things as he can shift down and remove the compression and then rise back up into that yelling as he slowly adds compression to the vocal style. It is it is intense and it's very theatric. I don't know if that is just some of the ways that the rhythmic ideas are going on. I don't hear a pattern. It feels more like speech than a poem. Also, I have the lyrics here, and the stanzas do not seem to have any sort of meter to them, or rhyming repetition, or even rhythmic repetition, which is the meter part. It really just kind of reads out as a story. Um, yeah, and then like I said, that mixed with the over-the-top vocal style, it's a very theatric thing. Uh, Kind of touched on this already. Layered melodies. I love this. We have this in our intro, and then we also have this in our first folk exclusive section, and we slowly introduce it into and mix it with other ideas in the rest of the track. Yeah, just never stopping with just one melody. After we get out of that pure black metal intro, everything after that typically has two melody lines with usually some sort of moving foundational thing rather than just playing chords, arpeggiating chords instead, for instance, so that you have movement where it's not just a full chord strumming, you have a series of single notes, but maybe they're outlining a chord. And they're all over the place and they're beautiful. And the thing is, especially when we get to that pure folk section at like 5 minutes in, and we really get to hear their melodic writing, there is a strong understanding of how to craft and utilize multiple melodic lines in a way that supports each other to great effect, where each line is interesting on its own, but bringing them together creates something exceptional. It is more than the sum of their parts. And, I feel like I say this often when we get these avant-garde or proggy black metal bands, but black metal to me is the opposite of melody. And it's always a nice surprise, but also a little surprising when I hear this. I'm like, this is just a black metal band. And then they whip out this beautiful melody writing with counterpoint, with trading off melodic lines, with moving foundational ideas that you also have to dance around with, because technically you're now creating triads, even though our foundational line is not a melody. And just being very aware of what each beat, or even half of a beat when we start working with eighth notes, what kind of characteristics the chords, the triads are creating in those instances, and crafting them in a way where, like I said, each individual line is gorgeous on its own, but bringing them together elevate all three of them. It's just not a technique I associate with black metal composers. And it's always just, it surprises me, and it shouldn't. By now, I should understand that they're not exclusive, but it is a surprise to me. Just really beautiful stuff. Oh, yeah. I've been talking about this opening 4 minutes of black metal that is pure black metal, but it's not. I have auxiliary melody written here, and there are a few sections closer to the end of it. We do start with more of a pure black metal thing, but closer to the end of it, we do start introducing, I think, the violin. And we get these, like I call them, auxiliary melodies. They're on the fringe of the Soundsphere. The black metal section is really what takes prominence as far as the spotlight goes, but it is these moving ideas that kind of sit outside of it. And it's really neat how we have this slow addition where we include these instruments on the side and then slowly bring them in and then showcase them exclusively and then bring everything together. It's just this really nice flow of ideas that make everything feel interconnected. I'm not going to say that they all flow well together. In fact, there are two parts in the track that I think had zero flow, although it was entirely purposeful. Both times we had very stark shifts from one style to another, and they were, like I said, very intentionally done. But yeah, there is a connectiveness between everything. There wasn't a point where I was like, oh, this part doesn't feel like it goes with the aggression in the black metal. It all kind of fits together, and it's because they have these little connective ties between each of the sections. Before we get into the folk section, we introduce the folk instruments in the black metal section, so that when we get exclusively folk metal, we have this tie. The violin was already in the black metal, so it's connected, right? It's not a strong connection, but it's enough to make the song feel complete rather than a series of disparate sections. This song deals with a lot of contrast, and we've already talked about a few different types of contrast that they've done, But one that I want to touch on real quick is just tension and release. And they do this in a couple of different ways. We have chordal progressions that deal with this. We have chordal progressions that deal with just tension. There's a few sections. I probably physically made faces about it because man, tension just, it does something to me, but it just continues to build and build and build on the tension. Every new chord adds more dissonance or refuses to resolve the progression. The vocals get higher or more uh, cracklier. The guitars get wider and deeper, bitier, whatever. And it just continues to increase this tension. And then we'll resolve it all in one big moment. And yeah, it's little things like that. We also have, I mentioned like 4 or 5 minutes in when the first folk section came in, I was like, I was like, I need this, right? I need this release because, we've been grinding out this double bass kick sound and the tremolo picking for 4 or 5 minutes now. I need this moment. That's what I'm talking about. We get the tension and the release. And maybe not everyone is going to find the black metal moment to be tense, but I certainly do. There's a lot of attacks going on for that not to be tense for me. But it also showcases a separate side of the music in that there's a lot of drive in the black metal parts. And we can contrast that with the almost laid back element of our folk section, where even the chord progression has kind of lightened up a little bit and led towards something that I'm not going to say is holistically positive, but definitely not as biting intense as we hear in the black metal sections. So yeah, there's just a lot of a lot of contrasting sections that create tension in different ways, and then allow the contrasting element to release that tension. It is not a simple back and forth like a leading tone into a leading chord into a resolution chord, where we get this really quick moment of tension and release. It tends to be large moments of building tension into a single moment of release, and they are masters, I would say, of knowing when that point is. At least for me, like I said, everyone's going to have different thresholds for it, but I think they do a really good job of finding the point, at least for me, where it's the most tense, right? I really can't take any more. Taking 2 steps past that and releasing. Um, and just, yeah, like I said, just masters of finding that limit and going just a hair over. Already talked about the cymbals, talked about the drive. Oh, and repetition, right? We had to come to this. This song is 10 minutes long and consists of 4 ideas, maybe 5, I think, if we want to stretch a variation into its own idea. We stay in these ideas for a lengthy amount of time. We do have minor additions to them, such as our opening 5-minute black metal section, where we do add the violin at the end to create some melodic change. But for the most part, we're getting the same notes, the same speed of notes, eighth notes on pretty much everything. The double bass kick, the tremolo picking, those gnarly vocals for the first 4 whole minutes of the song, with one small change to it, which is the violins. There might be some nuance to it. Maybe, maybe the guitar shifts notes, right? We were starting on a B, and now we've shifted up to a D or whatever. But I can't hear those notes. And there's so much going on there. Everybody's attacking at this frequent speed that, to me, the only things that were changing were the vocals. Like I said, I couldn't really pick up on a rhythm or a pattern or anything like that to it. It seems like reading a story. So there is moment to moment changes going on in that aspect. But yeah, I mean, as far as the music goes, it feels like one solid idea with no variation for 4 minutes. Um, and we hear that at the end as well, where we have these extended 1 to 2 minute sections of just repeating the same 4 ideas, with sometimes adding an extra line to it, kind of feeling a bit like a small slow burn. Maybe 2 or 3 layers added, and they do it over the course of 2 minutes. Um, But yeah, just a lot of repetition, kind of going for that quasi meditation. But like I said, it's not too long. We're not getting 3 and 4 minute long slow burns. It's just, 1.5 or 2 minutes. And to me, it's repetitive to me. But I know that I have a very low threshold for repetition. So I'm kind of wagering that that isn't an exceptionally repetitious length for a lot of people. So that's why I say quasi meditative, because by the time I think you actually hit a state of meditation, they are changing to a new idea, even if it's very similar structure, still having the blackened metal instruments underneath and melodic components out of the folk on top. They do change up the melodies, the counterpoints. They pass ideas between instruments. The black metal band might change rhythms. We might add the cymbals in there. So they do change things up at a frequent pace. It's just less frequent than I would typically want. But like I said, we're not looking at some jam band doing an 8 minute long slow burn. So I think that covers everything from this first two tracks. I'm intrigued. Where are we going with this? There's a lot of really neat things here that I'm latching on to. I love the melodic writing. I love the counterpoint. I love the blackened metal as a texture. As I've mentioned before, I'm not against black metal. I'm just not a big fan of it being the only thing present. Let's dig into some lyrics, see what's going on here. We'll progress with the album. I think we're going to do one song per batch because they're all so long. Yeah, so we're just going to do one song, break it down, one song, break it down, one song, break it down. And the breakdowns for new people are going to be much shorter than this one. I know I just spent half of an hour talking about this one track, but we are not going to have what would be a 6 hour video, because I'm going to wager most of this stuff is going to be applicable to most of these tracks, so I won't have to repeat myself on them. I'll just be talking about how they differ and new ideas that have been brought in and unique concepts for each track. All right, let's dig into the lyrics here. Precipice, Pirouette, because our first track does not have lyrics. It's death worship, all of it. I don't know why my headphones are on. It sounds weird. It's death worship, all of it. Your gods wheeling above, spiraling down into the pit of pathetic carrion you call life, admonishing the vultures to tear away your fears with the promise of a better death. You are already rotting, every one of you, nothing but slurry clogging the gutters of decent folk who can't be reassured by empty platitudes of a clean sky. So I don't quite know what we're talking about yet, but we have somebody who appears to have a specific insight into life. This is the typical being able to see the truth of the reality. The one person who broke out of being the sheep and they now see what's actually going on. To date myself a little bit, this would be the people who have been released from the Matrix. The Matrix isn't even relevant anymore. That makes me sad and makes me feel old, which makes me sadder. Kids are probably like, "What's the Matrix?" All right, this is all rot. And oh, how we dance and pirouette amongst it all. Wouldn't dream of feigning smiles whilst carrying your dead weight through life's circus. A fate worse than death, so the carrion birds will feign whispers and raucous. Raucous? Raucous? I've seen the word, don't know how to say it. Howling tones, as they build worthless futures amongst your bones. If this is human nature, concrete it over and have done. Just have done. So yeah, he's saying that, life kind of sucks. And he calls life a circus. He says, if this is human nature, to have those who prey upon us whisper in howling tones as they build worthless futures among our bones. So they devour us, they use us to build futures that are worth nothing except maybe primarily for them, for the rulers. Which, I mean, we can look at this all throughout time. And he relates this back. He says, if this is human nature, for the people in the ruling seat to abuse those beneath them for a future that doesn't help anybody else, since this has clearly been going on for years and years and years and years and years. He says just concrete it over, just put a new foundation on top of this, bury it beneath the ground, and, well, he doesn't say start anew, but I feel that. You put down a foundation to build something on top of it. But yeah, he says, just concrete it over, get rid of it. I like to play in open graves. The crawling things raise their fists and howl. I find that the soil clogs my throat in such a way as to drag the vowels through a twist of ruptured bowels. To rise, then decay, then away, consonant cosmonauts choking on delay. Yeah, so this, I mentioned it doesn't read like a poem, and it doesn't. But I don't think that means that there's not some linguistic acrobatics going on here where we have some really neat things going on. Such as in this stanza, we have this nice rhyme here on howl, vowel, and bowel. And then after that, we get this nice alliteration, consonant cosmonauts choking. Well, no, because choking isn't an alliteration. No, it doesn't really work, but it still rolls off the tongue. It's not an alliteration, but it's still very nice. Not sure what he's saying, though, but it sounds nice. And sometimes that's enough to make me happy about vocals. The vultures have it right, sailing in under cover of night, or staring you straight out in glare of day. They'll have your eyes away so you don't need to blink the tears past. 1 foot wrong versus the precipice, you're at least 6 feet down. Can you wiggle your toes? Let's go. So, assuming that the vultures are the ruling class, which is the metaphor I'm getting, they say that the vultures do all of their dirty deeds without sight. They use the metaphor of sailing under the cover of night, but to me, that's a metaphor for doing things behind closed doors, unreported wrongdoings. They say, or they stare you straight out in the glare of day. They constantly keep their eye on you. It says they'll take your eyes away so you don't need to blink. It says you get one foot wrong, and now you're down in your grave. He says, but can you wiggle your toes? If so, then let's go. The all-consuming boogie of nucleus versus the rest of it. If the weather balloons were all screwed, never was one much for recall. Cells is cells is cells is cells. We could idle here whilst I rhyme that with hell, but I'm sure we've all got shapes to throw. Let us stumble through the opening lines. Let us dance for the sake of the fact that once we can't, we're all damned well wish we had. I'm still toying with all the gods of men. Don't let them push me around. We've been around and around and around, awaiting our chance to populate holes in the ground. So yeah, I'm not picking up on every single line, but this definitely seems to be a sort of rallying of the lower class to take down those that oppress them. At least that's what I'm getting out of it. And it's interesting too because it's done through the illusion of a dance. The pirouette comes up once, and then at the end, he talks about throwing shapes as we stumble through the opening lines, but let's just dance for the sake of the fact that we can't once we're dead, and we'll wish we had. So, put the things you care about on the line and push through and do what's important, which in this case, as we've talked about, is standing up to the vultures. Because if you don't do it now, you can't do it later. He says, don't let the vultures or the gods of men, as stated in this stanza, don't let them push you around. Because we've been around and around and around, tying back to this cycle of the ruling class building the futures on the bones of those that they rule. The cycle of that. It says we've been around this many times as we just await to die. It says populate the holes in the ground. Yeah. This whole thing kind of reads as your life has purpose, but if you just use your life to serve those who rule, then you're just wasting your time. You're waiting for your chance to populate the holes in the ground. So do what you need to do now, because you don't have another chance. And I can also kind of take this into an anti-capitalistic realm as well. But the two kind of go hand in hand these days. So I don't think we need to dive too much into that particular reading since it's very similar. Yeah, let's dive back into this. Interesting start to this. Also, black metal and social issues. Have we checked out anything like that before? I mean, there's no rule that says a genre can only have lyrical topics about a specific idea, but black metal is just not a genre I typically associate with social context. To me, that tends to be more of the punk aspect and hardcore. Black metal, I don't know if it's just because of a lot of the stuff we've checked out in the past, but it just tends to be more Satan-y and nihilistic-y. And there is not any of that here. There's definitely no nihilism. This is a rallying cry to get up and do something about the world around us. All right. Interesting that we talk about waiting to populate the holes in the ground, and our next track is called Tombward Bound. I'm also pretty sure these two songs moved right into each other, so let's dive into this. If we're in 4/4 or what? It almost sounds like a trumpet. Either that or someone just screaming. Really interesting wave. Yeah, that sounds. Really interesting use of electronica here that I don't think we heard in the last track. Drastically different from our last song. I was not expecting this sharp of a change. Very pensive, taking its time, also very quiet. We're hitting moments of a 25 dB difference from a height.
When a lonely child loses it to the moon. Now we're all carrion, rotting here at the gates to another empty paradise. I have been forever building pyres in my mind, gathering fallen limbs of masters past, till mind's eye finally fades out, blinded by final death of the root. I shall gather my strength amongst the remnants of my
really going hard on the theatric element.
fire against the eternal, twisting night, the never-ending, frost-bloomed night. I shall raise naught but sparks against the cold shrine.
Going for a bit of an optimistic era.
Gather here against the end. Those sparks will gird our honor. Sparks for kindling's roaring flame. Pyres of the mind starting up again. Death may be inevitable, but we can at least ride his trail. Grim determination as fortification, dancing through the mires, raising surprised rainbows against the night. All coiled as serpents gathering to strike at the light. One last dance amongst the embers, to lay down with the others before the dawn should chance.
Really nice to have the bass here as well.
Blood, end of the line. So it's an endless funeral, or so it would seem. It's all furnace flames and clots of earth and endless weeping. Oh, the fucking weeping! I can almost cry! All the mourners in their mournings! All void veils and emotion unveiled!
I love on the choir here. Oh, not a choir, just a single vocalist. Just really putting everything into this performance. Coming in hard with that atmosphere. And yeah, the bass is actually very present here. Not really doing much, but I can hear it. Building the atmosphere up, making it bigger, wider, darker.
Don't you worry! One for each eye, if you please!
Such a cool idea here. Interesting weighting too. There's so much. Okay, it kind of sounded like a Descent theme, but yeah, that ending doesn't. Black metal with melody on top of it, foundational elements on the side. Yes, yes. We have a cannon going on? No, I don't think. I think it's just heavily layered. We've got an electric guitar over here, 2 violins center. We have some bells center right. All right, we are going into the next track. It sounds like this album keeps on giving me new new love for it. Jeez, I did look it up because this vocalist sounds just like the Ash-inspired vocalist, and they're not the same person. But the styles of music are very similar. Interestingly, this album came out 2018, which was 1 year after Ash-inspired's debut album of 2017. So I wonder. Oh, they also had a single in 2015, though. I wonder if Ash-inspired was inspired by A Forest of Stars at all, because the two styles are just. They're so similar. I'm going to have to dig into more of this Forest of Stars, though. Yeah, because the vocalist is the same on all of them. And the vocalist, I mean, there's definitely musical components to all of this that keep me interested. I love all of the folk elements, the violins, the counterpoint, the melody writing. Like, I definitely need all of that in here, but man, even the band composition. There's no way. I don't know. I'm getting weirdness here. They also have really cool names, but it doesn't look like anybody is in both of the bands, which just kind of blows my mind because they're just so similar. Anyways, though, getting back on track, though, I love a lot of the musical things that are going on here, but the theatric spoken word stuff going on and just the raw passion in the vocals is keeping my interest in a wild way. It is it is like watching an actor just put on the performance of a lifetime, and that's what I'm getting out of this vocalist. Like, I can tell. I don't know how popular this band is. I don't know if this album won them any awards or anything. Not that black metal gets awards. Is there like metal award shows? Because, like, I mean, these guys are not going to be anywhere near the Grammys. So Best rock album is and the Grammys is stuff that I usually can't even agree with. Um, they just don't cast a wide enough net, I think, to accurately give away the best rock album. And do they even do metal? I don't know. Anyways, back on topic though. Yeah, the vocals here are just phenomenal. Like, I want to make an award show for fringe music now so that I can hear something like this and be like, this dude needs an award to commemorate the passion he put into this performance right here because it is just, you can feel it. It's this seething fury built up from within that he 100% agrees and believes every word he says. If not, he's getting into a character in a phenomenal way. Um, but yeah, like if this were a film, you would say that the actors lost themselves into the character. They've thrown themselves into this character. It is just such a visceral performance. Just listening to syllabic intent. I don't know how much of this is planned and how much is just the way his body wants to say these sounds. But you can just hear how he even chooses to emphasize a first sound before getting a word, especially on like F's. You'll have a, you really get that like a full second worth of holding that F sound before leading into the tone, or how he releases um, certain sounds as well, either just extremely harshly or allows them to resonate. And it's just this very human connection to the words that has just this it's just, what is that word? It's very charismatic, I think. I want to keep listening to him because the way he's saying things is infectious. I want to hear more of the way that he says things. It is just, I think it's just that raw passion that creates a type of charisma here. Um, yeah, I'd like, after listening to that track though, it just solidified it for me that I need to listen to more. um, the only thing I think I really want to touch on here before we move on is contrast. Not the same contrast we talked about earlier, though, of course. I'm talking about a new kind of contrast here, which is timbre. There's a lot of sounds in here that we have not heard before. In fact, the entire first 3 minutes of the track was brand new timbres as far as I could tell. We had some very atmospheric stuff, just some rumbly pads going on, very atmospheric ideas. There's like a glass shatter at one point, and there's this warbly, reverberant kind of sound behind it. And I was like, "Hey, what's that sound?" And then it got isolated. I was like, "Ah, yeah, that's that's like a synth with like some effects on it, whatever." And then my brain was like, "A synth." We've been talking about black metal and folk so far, acoustic instrumentation. Now we've got a synthesizer in here. What's going on? This is neat. So yeah, we got a lot of interesting sounds. I gave it an electronic edge for this nice, subtle. Subtle's not the right word. Simple introduction to the song, where we had a more of a straightforward spoken phrasing rather than like that harsh yelling. We got to hear a little bit more of just a more traditional speaking voice, elevated. Of course, there's still emotion behind it, but it hadn't moved into that seething rage yet. Um, and yeah, provided a nice platform for that section to kind of be a little more isolating. And it really did just kind of feel like some dude talking to me with this rumbling sound behind it, while also just increasing the theatrics of it all, which I think is just a word I'm going to keep using because it's so accurate. Like, I mean, theatrics obviously just kind of talk about exaggerations of ideas. You can be theatrical without putting on a show, but I also can firmly see like a stage play alongside all this. More like a one man play, I suppose, one man show, with just all these musical ideas, and then like stage props and setting and everything like that. And then this dude just up here just yelling these ideas out at the audience. But yeah, like I can see all of it, the moody lighting and yeah, fog rolling in on the ground. Yeah, so it's just a very theatric production in both manners of it. I didn't write this down, but I probably should have. I'm curious, do they have a second vocalist? Oh, this might be Catherine, Queen of the Ghosts. Like I said, they have really cool names. Our vocalist is Mr. Curse. But we also have the Resurrectionist, Mr. Longbutter, Mr. Rightbarrow, the Gentleman, uh, Queen of the Ghosts, and Mr. Kettleburner. So they have a cool little thing going on here thematically. But yeah, I'm gonna wager that this was Catherine on vocals here, and I love the contrast because even with the clean vocals from our lead vocalist, there's still that grit to it, and still a bit lower end. It's still boomier and earthier, and just has a really wide resonance to it. That when she comes in and provides those background vocals, they pierce, they cut. They're more pointed, they're thinner, they're higher pitched. It's almost the exact opposite of everything that Mr. Curse is throwing down, and that sounds like a nickname. Good old Mr. Curse over there. Someone with bad luck or something. Your local pagan practitioner who puts curses on people. His name's Bill, but you call him Mr. Curse. As a joke behind his back or something. No disrespect to the vocalist and their name choice. That's just the first thing that pops into my head. And saying it like that felt kind of weird. It felt like I was making a little joke. Yeah, Mr. Curse over there with his vocals. I feel insincere saying that, so I think I might just stick with the vocalist. Anyways, though, yeah, it's just like the exact opposite, and I love that contrast. Once again, I feel like all my favorite parts of this album are just going to be how they contrast what they've done with their next idea while still retaining that core element of driving monologues, driving music under monologues, which I think is an excellent genre we need to make more of. Because Ashenspire is probably going to be on my AOTY list this year. And I'm going to have to check out more Forest of Stars. So, I mean, I'm kind of here for this. Uh, Preach to me and also make some angry music underneath and I'll listen. All right. So yeah, I really like that contrast there. I think it worked well, not just in the moment and what the music was asking for, but just technically speaking, how the two vocal styles work with each other. All right, I guess we're going to get to some lyrics here. There are a ton of them. Losing the night in a race to hate morning when a lonely child loses it to the moon. Now we're all carrion. I don't know what this means, but I get the gist. I don't know what it means when a child loses it to the moon. But the way I see that is that the moon has done something to the child, and now everybody. No, that doesn't make sense. Losing the night in a race to hate the moon. Sorry, losing the night in a race to hate morning when a child loses it to the moon. Now we're all carrion. So we're tying it back to the previous section of the vultures. We've become the vultures when we do this, but I don't quite know what this is yet. Rotting here at the gates to another empty paradise, I've been forever building pyres in my mind, gathering fallen limbs of masters past, till mind's eye finally fades out, blinded by the final death of the roots. I shall gather my strength amongst the remnants of my kin and build a bonfire against the eternal twistings night, the never-ending frost-plumed night. I shall raise not but sparks against the coal shrine pitch, but as we gather here against the end, those sparks will gird our honor. Sparks to kindling to roaring flame, pyres of the mind starting up again. Okay. So, sorry. Yeah, so basically, this is once again a call to arms, right? All of this can weaken our internal flame. So I'm going to be over here building a bonfire, hopefully to spark my own flame, but also to spark others, is kind of what I'm getting here. Death may be inevitable, but we can at least ride his trail. Grim determination is fortification, dancing through the mires, raising surprised rainbows against the night. All coiled as serpents gathering to strike at the light, one last dance amongst the embers, to lay down with the others before the dawn should chance to come, for this blood the end of the line. Yeah, this whole metaphor here is going over my head. That does not bode well for understanding the rest of the track. Alright, so this is where we have our second vocalist come in, and she says, "Would you hear me, carrion wanderer, echoing chamber of void?" Against that, she just repeats those two lines. Against that, our lead vocalist says, "So it's an endless funeral, or so it would seem. It's all furnace flames and clods of earth and endless weeping. Oh, the weeping, I could almost cry. All the mourners and their mourning, all black veils and emotion unveiled. Shut up and get in the ground. The words aren't complaining, they'll make a hearty meal of yours, and the rest of you, I'm sure, get in the ground. I'll take up a shovel and hazard a grind. If you don't know the drill, well, I'll fill you in. It's a dark old life on the whole, so step right up and down you go." So this, I mean, there's a lot of apathy here, right? And I'm not quite sure who the apathy is pointed towards, or maybe if we've even shifted perspective. But anyways, there's an understanding that death is constant. As he states, it's an endless funeral, and people are always crying. And he's tired of it. He tells everybody to just shut up and get in the ground. You know, shut up and die already. The worms aren't complaining. They'll make a hearty meal of you, and the rest of you, well, I'm sure as well. So just get in the ground. I'll take up the shovel and hazard a grind. He says, I'll even fill the hole in for you. And if you don't know the drill yet, let me fill you in. It's a dark life on the whole, so step right up and down you go. So life kind of sucks, so just hop on into your grave. This almost makes me feel like it's not from the perspective of our previous person who was doing the rally call to take down the ruling class, but this actually feels like the ruling class, but there's also a nihilistic anger here. So I'm not quite sure. Misplaced apology nailed to contradiction. I'm not worshipping that. A life spent seeking balance. Perhaps my spirit's just not level. Always angling towards hell. Catch of the day not worth a glance past nightfall. Dancing with the devils while throwing money to the spirit lenders. Sale or return, you can keep it. This is not a percentage decrease in decomposition. You can dance around my tombstones all you like, but I'll be grabbing your ankles as and when I please. I may not be the lord of the dance, but I'll have my tuppence worth. Don't you worry, one for each eye if you please. This feels like the same person from our first track. Calling out the people who continue to support the ruling class even though they are not the ruling class, and condemns the ruling class, while also calling out the doublespeak that those who rule typically utilize, and says that even when they're dead, they will still go against the ruling class whenever they like. He says, you can dance on my tomb, but I'll still grab your ankles when I please. And he says in the end, he'll still get his revenge. One for each eye. Interesting. Let's move on here. Oh yeah, it was called Tombward Bound. Makes sense that we dealt a lot with graves in that one. Next up, we have Premature Invocation, and let's see where they're taking us here. So we have the electronic stuff again, doing our atmosphere. With a flute? Another new instrument? Yeah, that's airy like a flute would be. Really somber. A little dark, but not quite so much as the opening to Tombward Bound was. There's actually a bit of serenity in here too. A little bit of tension and dissonance. Instability with the little warble on our guitar over here. Another moment of just super sharp contrast between two ideas. Guitar just hitting those notes. Making some strong groove there. Weird to go into the black metal just to come back to here again though. Same guitar, same flute. It's interesting the rhythmic difference between the rhythmic background and our vocal rhythm.
They can't see me, I'm gonna
like how this feels like biding time. Waiting, planning. The cymbal work. Yeah, getting some synthwave vibes. I'm always down for that. Oh, those ghost notes sound so good. Build that tension. Oh, to nothing. Using a cymbal roll too. Yeah, the cymbal roll to allow it to diminish and feel like it's pushed out to the sides. I love the shaker too to give it that rattlesnake kind of vibe. So good.
This astray earth, the fully realized product of so-called human evolution. Vultures voicing complaint at the state of the carrion. Sunlight filtered through a mire of thought crime. I peek into the void to remind all is nothing. All is nothing. Nothing is all. Same old cliches. Same pitiful joke. You like a punchline. If the sky should crush upon us in a shower of sparks, our shadows shall be thrown everywhere. Off the walls, across the concrete, bathing torch and glass ceilings in plastic decor. Throwing shapes we never dreamt of. Cramped up in the drains. Sense of purpose lost in the runoffs. Filled with just so much effluent in the language of the sewers. Bone and synapse, just so much slush. Sluiced by the eternal juicer. Armageddon dancing on top of it all. Azrael dreaming of shots of just so much human slurry. Bloody Mary, bloody Father, bloody Son, or just a hint of bone crunch. Sitting amongst the coroners in a round tomb is not so possible, but everything is flat. The earth is flat, but growing slightly fat on the cooling coagula of mankind's last parts.
Yeah, all right. Jeez, man. What? What is going on with the emotional flow of the album? Completely from a musical perspective, I enjoy the contrast of the highs and the lows, but it's moments like that that have caused me to reevaluate some of the other transitions we've had, and I don't always think they make perfect sense given the moment. Right here, we just went on this huge tirade about the current state of life with rising tension, rising notes, rising volume. Our vocalist is becoming more and more severe in their punctuation. Not like the punctuation in the senses, but the way that he utilizes percussive elements in his speech. Maybe percussiveness would make more sense there. And we bring it all up to a head, and then just our last 30 seconds is a violin and guitar duet. Just quietly leave the song out. And I get that it makes sense going into this next track. I'm sure that they flow together perfectly here. It probably makes sense in the transition, but it doesn't make sense coming from where we were at. And it, like I said, it made me reevaluate some of the other sections of the album so far. I'm like, I enjoy the highs and the lows. I like the contrast, the moments to breathe. I really needed a moment to breathe there, but it doesn't feel like that moment needed it. It felt like we needed to stay where we were. We had a lot of tension there. Where did it go? It wasn't a release, we just abandoned it. It felt unfinished, is what it feels. Is my take on it. And maybe there's a point to that. There's been many times in the past where I've said that something felt wrong because of what it did musically, and then we look at the lyrics and thematically, it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I don't always feel like the jumps, whether jumping up to intensity or down in beauty, I suppose we can call it, uh, are always warranted by the song. I appreciate them for sure, but do they need to come at that moment? Is there a better way we can move between the two? And this kind of brings up my next topic that I wrote down, which is harsh transitions. We talked about, well, I started to allude to it on the second song, I think, but there's just so many things I wanted to get to. I think I glossed over it. There's a lot of moments where we are just quiet and then we're loud. Beat 4 of this bar, we're quiet, and beat 1 of the next bar, we're at a 10. The black metal comes in, the screaming comes in, and we'll be up there. And then beat 4, we're here, and then beat 1, we're back down here. And it happens often enough that I've made a note of it, and I'm not particularly happy with those decisions, and it makes me curious why. Because as I showcased in our opening, I think it was the opening track. Oh no, it was actually the second track. How I had mentioned that we started out in the raw black metal and we had a smooth transition into our first folk section at like the 4 or 5 minute mark of that song, if I remember right. Um, and I really enjoyed how they introduced elements of the next section to lead us into it, so that when we got there, despite being vastly different, we had connective tissue to the previous one. And I feel like those transitions haven't been utilized much at all, if any, since then. There's just a series of harsh transitions, and I'm starting to guess when they're coming up, which is helpful because when we go from low to loud, it's startling at times. I'm not expecting it, and it's a huge volume shift. But from the loud to the soft, it's not startling. It just kind of comes out of nowhere, and I'm left wondering what we did with all that energy. Uh, where it went musically. So, I don't know. Like I said, that's something that's starting to stand out to me. And I'm just kind of curious what the purpose of it is. Is it just that they don't want to write transitions? They don't like to write smoother transitions? Maybe there's a reason for the harsh separation between the two sides. I don't know. But this is 2 songs in a row, I think, where it's just back to back to back to back to back harsh transitions, and it's a pattern that's starting to stand out to me. I also wrote down different emotions for each track, and I really love this. Part of it is just going to come from timbre. Each of these songs has a different feel to it, musically, instrumentally. Um, Track 2 is very heavily drenched in black metal. Almost every aspect has a black metal element, and when we take that away, I called that section a folk section, but I wouldn't really call any of the non-black metal sections in tracks 3 or 4 folk. They've taken on a bit more of an electronic vibe to them, and in their last one, we actually included a flute. I feel like every song we have a new instrument being added, which might go along with some of the themes here of uh, growing a following in order to take down those that oppress us. That would be actually a really, I don't know if that's what they planned on, but now I want to make a song or I want to make an album, it's a concept album about increasing the group. It doesn't necessarily need to be like a taking down the oppressors kind of thing, but a story about growing a group of friends possibly, and each song adds a new instrument to the mix. That sounds like a nice idea. Ah, all right. Anyways, yeah, each track though adds a new instrument. We have the folk instruments in 2, we have the synthesizer in 3, we have the flute in 4 now. Um, and what's really interesting is that, like I said, they all kind of have different vibes to them. 2 was driving in almost all of it. 3 kind of gave us this tense atmosphere, and 4 gave us, I mentioned, um, was it longing? Is that what I said? No, 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 pensive. That's the word I used, pensive, because we had that moment of anticipation, sitting and planning and waiting. What was that word I used? I don't remember. But just biding your time, I think was the phrase I used. And it just feels tense, but also easygoing, just waiting. Um, Really nice moment. Then there's also some synthwave vibes in track 4 as well. So, yeah, like I can easily say track 2 is the folk one, track 3 is the atmospheric one, track 4 is the synthy one, the synthwave one. And I think that's really neat. It helps the album not get jarred, what's that word? Jarbled up? Where it all just kind of rolls into one thing, which is something that happens occasionally with bands that have less sounds to them. You can kind of smash all together into a unified sound, and you don't really remember what each track was because they're all very similar. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you're specifically wanting a sound, you want a band who's going to consistently deliver it because that's the mood you're in. Um, but there are some albums I look back on, I'm like, I don't even know. I remember a general sound. Every song just kind of feels the same to me. And even right there, I kind of had this negative element to it. They all kind of sounded the same. Like that's a bad thing. It's not always a bad thing, but I feel like often enough it's referred to as one. And at least for me, a fan of novelty, I definitely enjoy albums that change things up every once in a while. And being able to remember each track so far by their emotional atmosphere, that's pretty nice. The final thing I want to touch on before we hit the lyrics here is rhythmic differences. I don't even know if I can call this syncopation. I guess technically by definition it is, but it feels more haphazard, less intentional. When the vocals came in after we got that really nice groove, we had the hand drums and some sort of, I don't even know. There's another instrument in there. Um, oh, I need to talk about, drop my marker, long time ago. Finally got it. Um, the rising section, because that was cool. Um, well, oh yeah, the rhythmic things. Okay, so after we had the really interesting rhythm come in, we had the vocals come in not too long after that. And we had this really nice syncopated groove in pretty much the whole band, and our vocalists came in and did their own rhythmic groove that was less syncopated about against itself. It really didn't have changing elements as far as note lengths to create like a nice rhythmic, stylistic rhythmic idea. It was primarily concocted of similar length notes back to back. There was a few occasions here and there, but it was more of just like really drilling this in. And it was interesting to listen to that against the groove that we had in the rest of the band. And the timing was not necessarily rigid because normally when you have a straight rhythm versus a syncopated rhythm, and that's how you get really groovy ideas like in djent. That is kind of the basis of how you write djent is write something super syncopated and then play it against something straight, just laying down the downbeats. And our vocalist is supposed to be the straight element here. And it isn't. It is slightly out of time. It is whatever feels right at the moment. So even though the rhythmic idea might be a bit stricter, when the vocalist decides to start the rhythm is not always the same. So we get these secondarily syncopated ideas against our primary syncopated ideas. And honestly, it feels like the rhythm's falling apart, but it works somehow. And I don't know, it's just a really odd moment. I enjoy it for its gutsiness, but it really makes me question the vocalist's relationship to rhythm because it is such an odd decision. But like I've mentioned before, everything the vocalist does just feels very innate. Um, and this feels, once again, like the rhythm that the vocalist just feels when he has these words in front of him and the music in his ears. Um, but it's just such a different relationship to the groove than I have. I don't know that I could ever come up with that rhythm, and that makes it stand out to me. It's an interesting decision. Again, I don't want to point out that it's bad. It does feel like it's clashing a little bit, but maybe the clashing is purposeful. Regardless, I did say it works, and I don't know why it works, but it does. So I don't want it. I don't want anyone thinking that I'm bashing that decision or anything, or saying that they did something wrong there. It's just very unique, especially compared to everything else they've done in here, where the vocals tend to line up with the rhythms of the band a little closer. Although I wonder how much of that is because the vocals typically are associated or typically utilized during black metal sections, so just constant eighth notes. You really can play whatever you want and you're going to be in line with that rhythm. Or atmospheric sections where there is no rhythmic groove, it's just held out chords. This was the first time I think in the album that we have the vocal section against a non-straight rhythm, something with change to it and syncopation. Um, yeah, another thing to think about going forward. The rising section. Yeah, we got to talk about this because this was so good. So what it was we had these notes that would rise, hit a point, and then dissipate, and then rise and hit a point and dissipate. And just on its own, that dynamic idea right there is very cool. Nothing out of the ordinary, you know. Lots of bands have crescendos. In fact, we have notation name for this. It is just a crescendo. There's nothing special about it. But it's how it's utilized in the way that they went about embellishing on it. They could have just left it as it was, but instead they also introduced dissonance in the dyad that was done here. So it starts out, I don't know if it starts out harmonious or not, or if that's just because of the volume down there, but as the volume rises, it feels like we dig more and more into the dissonance of these two tones. And that could just be because our sound waves are growing in size and they're clashing harder. But yeah, so we get increased dissonance with this as well. And then eventually we also add in the cymbal roll. And at least to my ears, it sounds like he switched to fuzzy mallets rather than drumsticks because it's a nice uh, wide roll rather than something that's a bit more pointed and punctuated like a drumstick would be. We get this really nice roll, starts out small, comes up big, and then diminishes. And it kind of feels like it helps pull the sound apart and resonate out. And then we also add in a shaker, which kind of gives this whole section. Because, you know, I had just mentioned that this part felt like biding your time, waiting for your turn to act, right? So adding this shaker that reminds me of a rattlesnake ready to strike is so perfect. Oh, this whole section is so good at just building tension and releasing and building tension and releasing. And through this rising tension building, it also builds its own larger amount of tension of when is this one, you know, which one of these is going to be the one that strikes. And they keep getting bigger and bigger. It was just the guitars, then the cymbal, then the shaker. You know, everybody, you know, we're adding these layers to it. And the fact that each time we get up there, we just dissipate again, it continues to build tension. You're on the edge of your seat. Is this going to be the one that strikes? Such a good moment. Love it. All right, let's dig into some lyrics. Cleaved of hoof and shorn of mane, you can keep your shrines no matter shape or size. There's nothing here for me. I'll happily quaff all your spirits, bleed your coffins dry. Use my 9 lives across 9 days and 9 nights. Now I just wait for the fires. Reduce me back to ashes. Our magic circles don't align. Too much static in our tragedy. Too much standing still, put off to dry. Fell off heaven's window sill, broke every bone as I tripped through hell's silent fractures in reality. I'll be laughing while you cry, nostrils crystalline at the end of the line. Game over for all time. Show me your compassion. I'll give you contempt. Open those hearts to me. I'll piss on them. I've had all the gods on my waiting list, all too human. They can't see me. I'm never here. I'll nail any apologist to any passing tree. So, this is a story. Is it not? Maybe? I don't know. I do know track 2 was about getting people to open their minds, open their eyes, and see what's going on. Track 3 seemed to be about this movement towards the grave. So much imagery about death. And now we have a story of somebody who ran out of lives, quite literally stated that. There was no magic to bring them back. They fell out of heaven's windowsill into hell. And it is game over for all time. I get the feeling that these are connected stories. It tells the passage of a rebel fighter who was possibly captured and executed, or maybe just died while trying to fight. I don't know. And now they are in the afterlife. That's kind of the correlation here. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I'm seeing so far. Maybe that idea will get destroyed in the next track. No joy here, just this hammer. This ashtray earth, the fully realized product of so-called human evolution, vultures voicing complaint at the state of the carrion, sunlight filtered through a mire of thought grime, a peek into the void to remind all is nothing. Nothing is all, same old cliches, same pitiful joke. You want a punchline? If the sky could crash upon us in a shower of sparks, or shadows shall be thrown everywhere, up the wall, across the concrete, bathing tortured glass ceilings in spastic ichor. Throwing shapes we never dreamt of, cramped up in the drains, sense of purpose lost in the runoffs. That's, interesting. Mingled with just so much effluent in the language of the sewers, bone and synapse just so much slush, sluiced by the eternal juicer, Armageddon dancing on top of it all, Asriel creaming off shots of just so much human slurry, Bloody Mary, Bloody Father, Bloody Son, with just a hint of bone for crunch. Sitting amongst the corners of a round tomb is not so possible when everything is flat, the earth is flat, but growing slightly fat on the cooling coagula of mankind's last fart. Okay, I don't know, maybe not. I mean, this also could be the thoughts of somebody who was already pretty negative about the human experience, having the knowledge of the afterlife, and still, kind of diving more into it. But I really like this line. You want a punchline? If the sky crashed upon us in a shower of sparks, so if we reach some sort of Armageddon, right, where our current lifestyles failed, our sense of purpose would be lost in the runoff of the drains. I love that. So many people's sense of purpose is wrapped up in what is now, right? I mean, even me, my sense of purpose for most of my adult life has been music related, but music is culture, and if culture doesn't have or if a group of people don't have a culture, such as something post-apocalyptic, where art is not necessary because survival is all that matters, I've lost all sense of purpose at that point. That is, I've never even thought about that because honestly, why would I? I don't typically think about the end of the world too often, but yeah, wild. Anyways, though, everybody will be killed in this event of the sky crashing in, and the gods will be drinking our sewer blood mixture stuff. I don't know. I don't know. That one went way over my head. I thought I had a pretty good idea going in halfway through this album. 4 tracks down, 4 tracks left, and I am lost on what's going on lyrically here. Let's dive into the next track then. Nowhere better but forward. Children of the Night Soil. This is the shortest track on the album at just 6.5 minutes. Let's see what's going on. Okay, look. I know I don't pause stuff, right? I just got done talking about this though, the harsh transitions, and this kind of makes me want to duck back a second, look back at Premature Invocation, because I had mentioned at the beginning of that track we were soft, and then we went heavy, just a very harsh transition into it for 20 seconds, and we came back down to the exact same place we were with the flute and the violin, I think, and the atmospheric synth stuff going on. There was 1 or 2 new instruments, but I don't really think they came from the black metal aspect, so it wasn't a transition thing to introduce the ideas. We could have introduced them just fine as layers on the slow burn. The only thing is that this gave us contrast. We didn't sit in one section for an extended period of time. But I don't understand the musical purpose of these. And we just saw it at the end of Premature Invocation. We were at a high point, and out of nowhere, we ducked down to like 2 instruments to finish off. And I had said, I guess it makes sense moving into the next track. And it doesn't, because the next track immediately forfeits that to jump right back up to 10. And I don't understand the point of all of this musical hopscotch. Why are we shifting from 2 feet to 1 feet all the time? Just stick with where you're at if that's what's going to make the most sense moving forward. I really am curious. I think this is my biggest hang up for this album so far, is the transitions and how often we flip the switch just to come back to where we were. All right, let's get back into this. I'll start it back from second 0. I think. Yep. All right, let's go. Yeah, those triplets on the cymbal, that is fast. Plus with the blast beats, like, very compressed though, very close. The production here is very tight compared to when we bring in any other group of instruments. one of the few times I think that harsh transition worked to just dissipate that energy and go down to the single synth, but we came back up anyways. Very interesting. This is the slowest we've actually heard vocal rhythms, and it's definitely tied into the fact that they're growlier than usual. A lot more air is required to produce this. Makes it feel more hulking, more exasperated. The amount of energy necessary is exponentially higher. The layered vocals there are a nice touch. A waltz. A little bit of bass presence. Very haunting, but I think this is also the first part where the music has begun to overwhelm the vocals. All right. So I talked about this a little bit, and I felt like I was saying too much talking over this song. I want to bring it up right here. The vocals in the first half of this are very different. Assuming that I'm right about the story and that our character is no longer living, at least in this plane, I think it's interesting that they decide to change their vocal style to more of a growl, and growls require more air. You can hold them out for a much shorter amount of time, and it creates a slowing down of the rhythmic element in our vocals. It almost feels like they are exasperated, like the ability to speak requires so much more energy than it did before. Again, I don't know if that's thematically accurate or narratively accurate, but I do like how I think this is the first time we've gone into that style of vocals, and it just happens to be after they talked about being buried. Um, I think this song so far has been the track that is most egregious for those stark shifts, and especially the temporary stark shifts where we drastically move to a different idea for not a very long amount of time and move right back up to where we started in it, which greatly upset me. It upset me so much that I had to pause the song to talk about it while it was still fresh in my mind, just because it's just, it really doesn't work for me. It is the blight on this album. It's not a big issue though. Honestly, I will probably listen to this album again, and the more I listen to it, the less that it's going to aggravate me. As with anything, the more you listen to music, it kind of flattens out. The novelty goes away in both cases. Whether it's novel and you enjoy the changes, eventually you'll know that the changes are coming up and they become less novel. And the same thing with the harsh transitions. You know that they're coming up, they get less harsh, and your mind just kind of paves over them, cleans them up a little bit. Um, so, the more I listen to it, it's really not going to be that big of a deal. But on a first time listen, man, it is. This song, like I said, it's the most egregious offender. It is. It's doing it all the time. Um, I loved the dual vocals though. Probably should have talked about this a second ago when I brought up the growls, but we had the growls and the yells somewhere in here in the middle, and I thought that was really neat. I enjoyed that. I would not mind more of that. I would not mind more vocals anytime. Bring back those vocals from track two, I think it was. Uh, the female vocals. Bring back some of this clean and harsh. Just I know it doesn't work particularly well all the time with this spoken word style, especially with as what I think is more of an off the cuff style of presentation. I'm sure double tracking this would be insanely difficult. In fact, I would be very surprised if the vocals are double tracked. Um, just because there's so many little nuances that I don't think our vocalist is entirely conscious of, entirely in control of. It is intentional in that it's what the body wants, but I don't think it's intentionally done mentally, planned out that way. So to bring in a second vocal, whether it's a double tracking of the same style or harmonizing, I think could end up being more disastrous than uplifting. Not a supportive, but I still would like to hear more of it. And right here, I think it worked really well, having the growls and a less animated yell. But yeah, I'd like to hear more of that. Um, I love the shift to the waltz. Not happy with how we came out of it. And it almost does feel like a transition note. We harshly shifted into it so that when we brought the waltz into the heavier section, it didn't feel as out of place. But I don't know. I just wish there was smoother transitions sometimes. Because I even mentioned at the beginning of the song that there was one transition that I think really worked well. It was heavy and loud, and then just the next moment we brought it down to a single violin, maybe single piano. I don't remember what it was, and I really enjoyed that. It was very novel, despite them doing this all the time. In that we reduced it down to a single instrument that I think embodied that moment. We were at such a high point that we went to the exact opposite. That worked. As far as I'm concerned, they undermined that when 10 seconds later we jumped right back to where we were. But I really liked that single moment. So, like I was saying, I don't think every harsh transition is. Not every harsh transition doesn't work for me, but a majority of them do, and it happens so often that it's just a recurring thing. The more often you do something negative, the more it feels like it happens. Recency bias? No, that doesn't sound right. I don't know. But yeah, if it was one song, whatever. When you do it 4 times in a song, every song, I start to pick up on the pattern, and I don't know, man. I don't want to say too many bad things about it because it really is my only blight. And like I said, it'll go away with repeat listens. But it is standing out so bad on this one, especially this track in particular. Um, yeah, I didn't take any notes on that one, so I mean, remembering back, other than the waltz, which was a really nice shift, and I love the violin on that section. I don't know if they did anything to the timbre of it, if they modulated it at all, but it sounded just a little warmer than it has before. It really fit there. It might have just been a small EQing thing as well that the producer did, but I absolutely love the way the violin sounded there. It was just really well done. Um, yeah, I guess that's about it then. Let's dive into some lyrics. We'll keep this train rolling. They're crawling all over my mind. Sunrise. They're crawling all out of my mind. Sunrise. There's only so much advantage for the taking. I've been buried here for years, for I am dripping with stars. Once golden shower of sparks pouring in and out, shattering every dancing synapse. It's interesting that this dancing thing keeps coming up. Um, I don't think I've seen anything in particular that would point towards the dancing metaphor being so strongly prominent throughout the album, that ties it all together yet. Maybe by the last track, it'll make a little bit more sense, but like the title of the album, the title of the tracks, none of them really point toward the dancing theme, but it continues to come up in the lyrics, so that's interesting. Infiltrating the bored holes in my skull, I just need a little nail to alleviate the pressure. If only they'd oblige me. Sunrise? Not so, supernova. Do let me know when it's all over. I just can't take the joke. It went over my head. It went through my head once, twice, thrice. Sunrise. Yeah, I think this is where I've gotten off the train and I can't catch up to it anymore. The lyrics are way over my head right now. And it is just not making any sense. They couldn't wash my brain. It crackled. Yeah, with all that static syrup of thoughts of melees, had to settle for being picked clean by vaudeville vultures in the final laudrette of the soul. Didn't want the ticket out of here. Couldn't see the point in running, gunning for the 6-foot hole. Forever chasing tails only to bury a hammer in the shattered beauty of their lies. It's all untruth dancing behind the eyes. I could feel them all jostling against my retina. I tried to blink them away. They are going nowhere. Yeah, so I think my idea that this is a linear narrative is shot. This person has been, they've attempted to brainwash him, and then it also seems like they tried to buy him out. And he says, I didn't want the ticket out of here. I couldn't see the point in running for the 6-foot hole. So once again, we have a death being a very prominent aspect of the lyrical component. And also endless cycles, forever chasing tails only to bury a hammer in the shattered beauty of their lives. The cyclical nature of not really getting to do anywhere, running in place, forever chasing a tail. They form a thick string of drool consuming my everything. They hermetically seal my tomb, my eyes, my tomb, my skull, my tomb. Roll this curse away. Only way out is putrefaction. Then I can run away with myself gelatinously. As my old friend gravity dictates, I can go any way I please to run through my runnels, just as long as it's down, coagulating southbound, far from the sun. Tying us back up to wanting sunrise at the beginning. Which, I mean, that does kind of fit in with the idea of being buried. Them wanting sunrise and them crawling all over my mind, which could be alluding back to the worms that we had spoken about earlier. This is the children of the night soil. I'm trying to figure out the golden shower of sparks that pours in and out is. But now, unless that's like synapses firing off, right? I don't typically think of them as gold. For some reason, I think of them as blue. But I mean, that could be it. But now they're shattering every dancing synapse. So the worms are eating the brain, infiltrating the bored holes in my skull. If only they'd oblige me some sunrise. Maybe. I don't know. Kind of like being buried alive or still conscious in a dead body. I don't know, like I said, kind of going over my head. Let's move on though. Interesting. Here's the thing though. When I check out lyrics and I get it all and I connect it all, I'm like, man, this is expertly put together. I love how this mixes with this and like they're calling back things here. Like, yeah, that stuff's beautiful. If I don't get the lyrics on a first time though, here's the thing, at least they're intriguing me. I want to know what the next song's lyrics are, even though I know I'm not going to get them. And I really look forward to somebody explaining the lyrics to me because I am very interested. I'm a bit invested in what is going on here. All right, 3 tracks left. An 8, an 11, and a 9. Let's keep this rolling. We're moving on to Taken by the Sea. Oh, the one I paused early because I thought it was going to transition into, and it doesn't. That's my luck. Yeah, so I like this. This is more of a somber feel than we've had previously. Even in our softer sections, there's still a drive, an energy. I just talked about wanting more vocals. Let's go! Yeah. any of the momentum, energy that we had in our previous songs, even in the quieter sections. None of them are like this. This is a loss of motivation. It's also an immensely quiet song. Consistently sitting about 15 to 20 dBs quieter than our loudest moment. Now we've got the drive and intensity again. Completely different feel. There's tension, there's rising potential energy. It wants to push into something. There's still a sorrow, but there's... Yes, yes. Harmonica? Yes. Second chord. it's like a half step higher than it really wants to be, and that creates so much tension. All right, I think that's going to move on. I'm going to pause it there. Yes. Okay, so get that out of here. Remember what I talked about? The topic of the whole video is going to be contrast, and I really love how they contrast everything. They're always contrasting things. There's so much contrast going on between. This is the thing, though, right? The album has had 5 songs of similar ideas. There's been different things, different instruments, different sounds, different timbres, different emotions, but it's all very much what if we did black metal underneath melodic elements in synth and acoustic instrumentation with yelling over it? What if we tell the story of this dude who's very angry at the world? And the band says, we like contrast. I don't know if that's what they really said. That's what it feels like. They like contrast. They're like, so we need to contrast the album now. We need to make this song so much different. And I like how they decided to take a step back and shift what feels like characters. I really do think that this is a concept album that is narratively told. This is the same vocalist as track 3, I think it is, and it makes me curious if there's any ties here. This seems to be somebody who is mourning our character from the previous 5 tracks. The lyrics are very light in here. There's a lot of repetition. I remember when my seas turned gray and you floated away. I remember when my seas turned gray and I can't change that day. I remember when my seas turned gray and I couldn't make you wake. I remember when I could call your name. Now things can never be the same. Now you're not on this earthly plane. I remember when I could call your name, but that would be in vain. And all that I thought you could be, I let you fall away. It's very much about somebody mourning the loss of somebody who was close to them. So close to them that the loss of this person drained the color from their world. And they felt, maybe even they were responsible for this person pushing against the whatever was bringing them down, and was trying to empower them to be who they were in the events that led them to their death. Says all that I thought you could be. So I thought you could be someone greater than who you were. I pushed you to go do those things, and I let you fall away. I pushed you to do those things that led to your death. It's kind of what I'm getting here. There's a lot of regret. There's a lot of sorrow. The music is just very somber and downtrodden, especially for the first half of it before we bring in the moving element that we kind of tie together at the end with our melancholic opening. It's all just, to me, it's a very powerful moment of the track, not just in what it's doing, which it does well, between the vocal performance being just very single noted. There's obviously flow to it, but it's all a single style. It's all in the same range, all the same pitch, all the same vocal energy and placement. It's a very comfortable vocal style, which is very different from our other vocalist who is practically yelling. There's a lot of energy and force put behind it. Um, this character possibly is such the polar opposite of our other one. Um, and it just creates this massive contrast in the album, so that not only do we have a sad song, but it comes after constant 5 track length of driving music. This is very different from those momentary lapses into something a bit more folky or metally before returning back. This is a drastic departure from everything we've done so far, and we stuck with it. I absolutely loved that moment halfway through when we decided to get the drive into it, and we had the bass coming in on the downbeats. I think it was the bass guitar. And we had these rising ideas. Our melody would rise in pitch, and instead of looping back down, it would, but we'd also change the chord. So when we loop back down to our root tone, it's actually higher than our root tone was last time. So it's a constantly rising element here. Volume was coming up at this point as well. It was just this big, driving, momentous energy, and I was really curious where it was going. But it, to me, felt like a decision to get out of whatever paralysis was holding them down, the melancholy that was stopping them from doing anything. The vocals do not line up with this, though, but there is a huge moment of momentum there that we hear at the end, where it pairs back with the melancholy, and we have this drive and the melancholy combined. We are still sad. There's still grief going on in the music, but it is no longer stationary and static. It feels more to me like purpose driven. I would not be upset, as much as I love our male vocalist, I would not be upset if this vocalist takes over for track 7 and 8 as our primary vocalist is dead. That would be very cool. I honestly don't think that's what's going to happen. But I would not be upset if that happened, because I just massive shift, and it would be a huge surprise for me. Novelty, right? I've talked about that. I love novelty. That would be a drastically novel thing to do, to switch vocalists at the 70% point of an album. Now I want to do that too. This album has given me so many cool ideas. But yeah, just like everything about this song, it's done so well too. And like I said, even there at the end, when we get all of the vocal harmonies and the call and response there with All That I Thought You Would Be, I Let You Fall Away, and they kind of overlap. Just, it feels cyclical, like it's dominating their mind, right? Because prior to that, everything just kind of sucked. My seas are gray and you're gone, and I can't change that day. I can't forget about it. And interesting, they do say that you're not on the earthly plane, which kind of ties into my idea that this person is experiencing some sort of afterlife. So that's interesting. I don't really have much of a supernatural edge to the album other than that one component, which makes it feel a little out of place. But this calling directly to that, I mean, it could just be a one-off, right? Even if you're not a believer of an afterlife, you do believe of the next state of non-existence. So it doesn't necessarily point towards a supernatural angle, but earthly plane is a very pagan thing to say. And that typically has, other just bringing up the idea of a plane introduces supernatural planes to it. So I don't know. Maybe I was right about that. Maybe I was right. Anyways, though, basically just really stuck in this life sucks right now. And then there's this building intensity, building momentum, and it pushes into this cyclical idea here where it almost feels like she blames herself for what happened. And maybe that's going to drive her into action, which is what the next two songs would be about. I don't know. Like I said, I would not be upset if she took over as the main vocalist for the next two songs and the story shifted to her perspective. But we won't know until we find out. We won't find out until we listen. So, longest track on the album, Scripturally Transmitted Disease, sitting at 11 minutes. Let's see what is going on here. Filling up the entire Soundsphere. Those higher pitched ones get me every time. Yeah, falling into a nice groove out of that. Retaining the drums but bringing in this nice bass. Much better transitions this time around. I don't know if I'm just getting better at expecting them, or maybe this track just has smoother ideas. Alright, I'm here for this section. Don't change this on me. Holding out that M on Monolith, I'm telling you. Lots of vocal layers in this track too. I wonder if there's a narrative reason for that. That snare just sounds like someone knocking on a door. That's one of the driest snares I've heard. Love that melody up there. Once again, we have so many moving pieces. The layering on this is just, it's so well done and sounds effortless. What a sharp sound put in the darkness of the emptiness here. So it's interesting, it just said that they were seeking out Odin under the ice. Seeking out gods would probably take you to desolate places. Devoid of people, an empty cave it almost sounds like. Back to a 3. meltiness. These are the moments I live for on this album. Still waiting for a black metal moment with clean vocals. I don't think it's going to happen though. Oh, our second full stop. Okay. Wrote a couple of things down. I want to talk about volume dynamics real quick. I don't know if I'm going to get another chance to do this. This song really didn't have much in the way of volume dynamics, but the album as a whole does. And I meant to touch on this with our last track, Taken by the Sea. The quietest moment on that song was like negative 25 dBs. Is a drastic decrease from our full. It is a very quiet track compared to everything else on the album. It's not the only moment like that. There's a few sections on here that are actually quiet. When they dip down into a sparser section, the volume dips with it. And I'm a huge fan of that. You know, we talked about earlier with the swelling section, where we started out low. I don't remember what track that was. Oh, it says track 4 here. Whatever track 4 was. I really love the minute volume dynamic work that they have in some of these sections. And then of course we have the highs and the lows that at least are perceived volume shifts if they're not full on volume shifts. But the album does have peaks and valleys as far as volume dynamics go, and I'm just really appreciative of that. It gives the song, or it gives the whole album actually, moments to actually be quiet, and that is just something I don't hear too often, especially in black metal, which is rather consistent at its volume, but just metal and rock and mainstream music as a whole just always being at full blast, even in quiet sections. So yeah, I wanted to point that out. Just not really anything to add to it. Just I always like to give that little banana sticker when I can. Like, yeah, good job. You know, you put some real volume dynamics in your album. It really is a low bar, but I guess volume wars and all that. Producers typically keep the volume static. And I don't know if they self-produced or if they just got a producer who listened to them. I don't have personnel information on that. But yeah, just I appreciate it. That's all I wanted to say. This song has a very full Soundsphere, and it is impressive. When we talk about Soundspheres, it is not a real thing. In fact, I'm pretty sure I made up that word a long time ago, and I've been using it for a while. I came up with it before I made the channel, even. I don't think I've heard anybody use it. It's literally just because that's how I envision a song, especially with headphones on. if I actually had like a surround sound speaker setup, I might envision it that way too, but I've never had one. So when I have headphones on, though, I kind of envision this ball around my head, and sounds can be put above me, below me, behind me, in front of me, and to the sides. And then there's also distance, right? They can sound like they're far away, they can sound like they're right in my ear. Um, so it creates this metaphorical sphere around my head that my head is in the center of. The shape, no, the size, it's always a sphere, Brian. The size of the sound sphere can change. Sometimes when things feel very close to me, it also feels like the sound sphere is very close and it's a very full sound. We hear this often with black metal and a lot of the more extreme metals where they have a very compressed, close sound, but it doesn't feel like it's empty around it. We also have the opposite of this, which would be very large sound spheres, a lot of orchestral recordings, singer-songwriter stuff, pop music, electronica. Um, tend to feel like sounds can be very far away, and that kind of sets a distance for basically the x-axis, which would it would also uh, inform about the other two axes as it's a sphere, so it's got to be similarly shaped in all axes. And that can create spaciousness when it feels like the sphere is huge and your instruments are placed throughout it in various areas. It can feel like there's a lot of distance between the instruments. It can feel like there's a lot of distance between you and the instruments. And then, of course, we can have the opposite of both of these, where we have a very close set of instruments, but it feels like we're in a very large sound sphere. That tends to be done through echoing or some sort of production tricks that make it sound like the instruments are bouncing off of a very wide area. That is not something we hear very often. That would probably be a recording of like a string, well, not necessarily a string, but like a duet or a trio or a quartet or something, a small group of instruments being recorded in a concert hall. And it's going to sound like a large room with the instruments might be closer to the microphone, so they're going to sound closer to the headphones. And then, of course, the opposite of the other one is a very large sound sphere that is very full. And that's what we're getting here. And this is not a sound I typically hear outside of, again, orchestral playing or orchestral recordings. Concert halls tend to have a very large sound sphere, and there's a lot of instruments in an orchestra that can fill it up. It's not something I usually get with metal, but here we got it. This is very cool. We've listened to some music that I've called wide or big or heavy. They've always, made me feel like I'm under pressure of the music. But here, we kind of got that same thing. I don't remember where it was. It was not at the beginning. We had our metal moment, and then something came in around it and filled in the rest of the sound. And it really felt like the sound sphere was enormous. I felt small listening to that moment. I don't know what my face did, but I'm sure I reacted physically because I mentally felt very different at that moment. It was a massive sound. It felt huge. It felt wide. It felt like it was going to break the space that it was in. We might have heard something like that before. It's not coming to mind. But like I said, I typically hear stuff like that in orchestral music, where you have a lot of instruments and a very large room that they get recorded in. I don't think I've ever heard that in metal. I really don't. That was just bonkers. And for it to be the penultimate track of the album and the longest track of the album, I'm sure it has purpose. I don't know what that purpose is, but I'm sure there's a reason for it, which kind of leads into the next thing I want to talk about, which is emotional resonance. I'm missing something here, which I began to pick up in the last album, the one about the sea, Taken by the Sea, and a little bit in this one with that moment there. there's very rarely lyrics being sung in the non-black metal sections. It happens so rarely. So, the black metal sections are pretty static emotionally. It's just aggression. It's raw, it's powerful, it's forward momentum and driving. It is the one static element of the album. Our non-black metal sections, which I have to call them in relationship to the black metal because they are so diverse. I can't even say the folk or the acoustic or the electronic because it's kind of sometimes just one of those and sometimes both of three of them, four. It's just so varied. It is just the non-metal sections. Um, but yeah, so the non-metal sections are quite diverse in their emotional resonance, in their sound, in their feeling, their timbres, even the chords they use. There's just a lot of elements in there that create variation throughout the album. But most of our vocals exist at a moment when we are emotionally stagnant. And I have come to the idea that it's possible that the melodic interludes between and around the vocal sections are there to showcase the emotional resonance of the vocals outside of the raw aggression. Possibly. I don't know. I'm kind of picking up on this now as in the last track or two, I've begun to look at the lyrics as we're listening to them because, especially when we hit those black metal sections, they just loop and loop and loop and loop and loop. And I figure that's a good time I can try to listen into what the lyricist is doing, the vocals. Um, and I'm kind of catching correlations between the lyrics and whatever comes after the lyrical section, which is typically more of a melodic approach. We bring in the flutes and the violins and the synthesizers and all of that. We introduce melody and counterpoint and moving lines and layers. Um, and I'm curious if I've missed an entire layer of this album because I'm separating out the lyrics from the music and I read the lyrics completely divorced from the emotional aspect of them. Which, like I said, technically isn't a bad thing because the lyrics are typically sung over the black metal, the least dynamic emotional aspect. But it's possible that it's supposed to be tying into the more melodically nuanced sections that surround the vocal ones. So I don't know. Like I said, it's something I've kind of picked up on here, and I don't know how true it is. But if you have any thought on that, I mean, I'll ask you in the end, anyways. But let me know. Drop me a line in the comments. Like, yeah, Bryan, they do intentionally do that, or no, they don't. The music is just what feels right to put it there. I don't know. The last thing I want to touch on before we head out. We still have another track, dude. Is breathing. And this kind of ties back into just the physicality of our lyrics, of our vocalist. Um, there are so many moments where you can hear exhales or inhales, whatever makes most sense at that moment. That usually helps with delivering a line the way it needs to be delivered. The exhales more so than the inhales. That's just so that you can breathe. Um, but to really like put contempt at the end of a line, you might add an extra, put that little bit of extra at the end of it, right? So I really like how that's included, but also you can hear the breaths and the breathings, the inhales. And like I've said before, I really enjoy that. It adds this human component. And I think when you remove them, like we do often in pop music, we digitally remove breaths. It feels so robotic and weird. Pop music, and I guess to a lesser extent country music, especially modern pop country. Does pop rock do this? Radio rock doesn't. Alt rock doesn't. Maybe pop rock does. I don't know. It just feels like a weird thing that's related to pop music only. Hip hop kind of does it. Maybe. I haven't listened to enough hip hop to really say. I think in the hip hop I've heard though, I can't recall hearing any breaths, so maybe that as well. But hip hop and pop music are pretty close to me. yeah, I'm not a fan of it though. It feels weird. It feels robotic. It's not that it feels robotic. It feels like robots making music. Is what it feels like. Because there's still a lot of humanity in the performance, the notes, and especially when you listen to an amazing vocalist and you hear all the runs and stuff. But without the breaths, it feels weird. It's like what is it? It's an uncanny valley, an auditory uncanny valley thing for me, where it just does something about it doesn't feel right, and it's the fact that there's no breaths. It doesn't feel human at that point. So I really appreciate that here, and even when we have our female vocalist, like Taken by the Sea, which very prominently featured her, but also at the end of this track, um, I really appreciate having those breaths included in there. It's that human aspect. We're humans. We have to breathe. Don't take my breaths out of the music. It's part of my performance. um, yeah. So let's dive into some lyrics here. We'll wrap up our final track. Then we'll head out. Seeing as we're at 3 hours already. I've never been a pillar of society, quite the opposite, in fact, a plier of insults, a place marker on the path of least resistance, nothing more, a face in a crowd, but a crowd behind Bedlam's bars, providing a barbed laugh for the wealthy, a grinning dry target for the rigidity. Happily stuck in the throats of an angry mob stretched beyond repair by production line proclivity, I'm a steadfast refusal. I've shown no interest and I've reaped little that I've sown. A world of cloned mechanists have left me unwaveringly organic. Perhaps food for thought or just food for the worms. I stand as a final insult to the easily offended. All words out of turn to kindle their burning world. If for one moment I thought I felt a twinge of guilt, I would put it down to angry muscles shifting their weight against all the irrelevance. I will stand as a grave marker in resolute denial of the state of your 2,000 years of treading water. Yeah, so this is interesting, at least to me. Like, they understand that they were angry and still are angry at the vultures of the world, at those who, build up the future that is meaningless to everyone but them, and they are such a small minority of the people that it makes a meaningless future for all, to borrow lines from the second track, I think. But also understands that despite their resistance, like I mentioned, track 2 still feels like a rally cry to me for people to open their eyes and fight back. They still understand that they did so very little in the world, despite their reluctance and inacceptance of the state that things were in. It says, I've shown no interest and I've reaped little that I have sown. It says, maybe I just am the food for the worms. But I think it's also cool that he says, I have no guilt on this. Although I guess it's less about having no guilt, and the line here that was just beautifully stated says, if for one moment I felt a twinge of guilt, I would put it down to angry muscles shifting their weight against my irrelevance, which ties back into the idea that they understand they had very little impact on the world. They consider themselves irrelevant, which is also interesting given just how much impact they had on our female vocalist character from track 6. They don't understand. I mean, it's not relevant to the world, but they still had impact on someone within the world. I don't know if they are oblivious to that or not. But yeah, I'd put it down to angry muscles shifting their weight. So dig a deep hole for Abraham and all his insipid godlets, whatever name it goes by, it's all the same crumpled at the graveside. Abrahamic iterations all divide by zero, cartoon Lucifer presiding. Basically saying there is no gods. Which, yeah. Nah, it's nitpicky. I lost my shadow amongst the marionettes, soul chord measured found wanting. Probably too long, frayed and or split to dance with the more standard corpses in this world of garbage. I sold my spirit, might even have quaffed it blind without realizing any port in a storm, they say. Oh, So they say, heart removed as part of some half-assed mourning ritual, piss-begotten solitude sold out at the drop of a gaping fish-mouthed hat, filed away amongst the other stolen myths. The lore of these folks is not but a long string of syphilitic spit, scripturally transmitted disease, if you will. In fact, no, I insist. I love that. To say something, if you will, if you don't mind calling it that. Actually, no, I insist that you call it that. I love that line. So make a monolith of me, but plant me facing sunset. Calling back to track 5, was it? Asking for sunlight. Back turn to the broken day. Leave me here watching the darkness. I have no time of day. I have no time for day. Don't come looking for me. I'm long lost, seeking out Odin. Odin under ice. And then later on, we get our female vocalist. I've danced away, died away. Don't come looking for me. Long lost, seeking out Odin. Odin under ice. So I wonder if that means that she committed suicide. I've danced away, died away. And then follows the same line. Don't come looking for me, long lost, seeking out Odin, Odin under ice. They say the same thing there. I don't know. Really enjoyed the layered vocals, though, on that last bit. I don't think I touched on that, but I asked earlier for the clean female with the harsh male. Got it. Got it. It was only one time in probably the whole album, but I got it, and that makes me happy. So, let's finish this up. Last track today, Decomposing, Deity Dance Hall. Once again, bringing dance into the mix. Still not sure what the through line is on that theme, but let's go finish this up. 9 minutes ahead of us. This whole album has danced between 3 and 4. We're back in 4. And I wonder if the whole album has any reason for that, if it's just what each song worked with, what they felt they wanted for each song. Another new sounds. Got me. The tremolo picking without the double bass kicks on a higher string, perfect for the intensity of this moment. You still have that, whatever that is over there. It's the first dancey aspect of the whole album. like that last chord. Like vocalization, but it didn't have the right attack for it. Okay. I like how the chord shifts and then the melody comes down. It's done that twice now. There's an element of holding on in this whole section, holding on to what's been instead of moving on to what's next. Rhythmic right there. The bodies in the back started before the bands.
Decomposing Deity dance hall. It's a stateless carrion nosedive, all just a race to nature's basement. I really dig graves.
It's interesting here at the end of the album. That's what I was waiting for right there. Yep, come on, keep it going. Well, that was neat. Huh. Huh. I don't know what to think of that. It's an interesting outro. I do really enjoy how it felt like we dove so far down on that. I'm gonna guess it's some sort of modulation on the pitch. It's kind of bending it downwards. And we only ended like one octave lower, but it felt like we fell so far. Um, so this song had a dance section to it, which I'm glad. I don't have anything really to add to that, but we've had dancing metaphors this entire album. The word dance has come up, or dance terms such as pirouette have come up quite a few times. And oh, yep, I was going to say this song might not have one, but yeah, we did talk about the dance hall. So, okay. Um so often in the album though, and for there not to be a single dancey moment would have made perfect sense given the kind of music they make, but it was also just really nice to actually have a dancey moment. So yeah, like I said, not really anything to say. That I'm just glad we had one, and it wasn't even like super dancey because they could have went into something fully synth based and really made it like EDM or something, but they just made it bouncy, which is very different from everything else in the track. But this also seems to be the most uplifting song lyrically. There's revenge in here, so there's I don't really know if I could call Revenge uplifting or positive, but it's a lot better than everything else that happened in the album, so I guess we're going to stick with it. Bass presence is huge here. I'm so glad. I mean, not just in this track, just in general on the album. I spoke at the beginning, I think it was track 2, that the bass was just doing black metal bassy stuff and getting sucked in underneath the mix of everyone else. And that does happen from time to time, but there is at least a moment in every song where the bass gets to shine, and I really enjoy that. Even if it's just like even closer to the end. I don't know if I was just getting used to the mix, but there was one part where the bass was just every downbeat, and I heard it. Nice, big bass tone, and I was like, yeah, digging it. Um, okay, so we're gonna talk about the end, the last 2 minutes or so. I was a little concerned because we had the dance moment, and then we came out of that and we entered into, I think we had one more moment, and then we had to black metal though. And we had a right pan guitar doing something melodic with tremolo picking. You guys know my stance on this. Tremolo picking is a nice texture, but it kind of takes me out of the melody, especially since it tends to be slower melodies, and then I just kind of hear it as a series of whole notes and half notes. So it is doing something melodic. It is mostly adding to atmosphere, though, is kind of what I hear from it. And then we just have more tremolo picking and the bass doing some quarter note stuff, and then the drums going wild and the dude screaming. And I'm like, this is how they're going to end their song, with the most basic element of their writing. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? If you want your song to be a bell curve and you hit your most complex in the middle and you dip it back down and end on simplicity again, that's fine, right? I don't have a problem with that, but I just really love their more complex melodic writing, and I was kind of afraid we weren't going to have that in the final moments. I don't want this album to leave a sour taste in my mouth. I don't want that to be the last thing I heard was just straight black metal. Nothing against the music or the art or the theme. This is just completely me being selfish. Don't leave me hanging on just black metal. So I was a little worried about that. I even wrote here less layers in outro. A little upset about that. But then I crossed it out and I said, check out the last minute layers. Because we did shift to this and I was really happy. With about a minute to go, we had about 30 seconds left, 2 more repetitions where we took that black metal basis and then put a violin on top of it, and I think another violin or flute or something like that. We had a nice little moving idea, and then the black metal stuff moved away, and we had just the 2 acoustic instruments for a few seconds, and then that tone, and then like that weird outro I already talked about. I don't know what any of it means narratively. That ending of draining down and then resolving an octave lower. I don't know. There's also the idea of 2 instruments there at the end, and we have 2 characters in here that I think both died, and I'm kind of hoping that they found each other because at least one character was really upset the other one died. Although our primary character didn't seem to really notice that they had such an impact. I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm really curious about the female character in the story. I enjoy the contrast that the vocalist brings. I enjoy Taken by the Sea as a whole, especially in the context of the album. That is definitely one of my highlights. As far as the story goes, I'm kind of missing the purpose of adding the character. Especially since they don't come back in the final track. So I'm curious what their perspective is on that. This is going to be weird, but it reminds me of Nightmare Before Christmas. Right? So in the original book, there is no Sally. There is no love interest for Jack. Then when they made the movie, they felt they needed a love interest for marketing reasons. And Sally got added, and she got her own song. And that's why the ending feels kind of rushed, where they just fall in love with each other, even though Jack barely even knew she existed before that part. Like, it always felt like a weird ending to me. But that's kind of what I feel like happened here. Our female character seems to have very little to do with the song, with the album story that I've picked up on, and isn't really called back on at all in the ending, but I really enjoy the song in the middle. And I wonder, A Forest of Stars, what their perspective, because I could have the story all wrong too, in which case my perspective on this character, if it even is a character, it might not be a concept album at all, and I'm pieced together strings that don't exist. But yeah, like I like the inclusion musically. I don't understand the inclusion narratively. Is where I'm standing with it. But again, like I said, I could just have the wrong grasp on what's going on narratively as well. The last thing I want to talk about here, the punchline. The very last spoken phrase of this album is "I really dig graves." And I think it's a dual meaning. Not only that this person enjoys graves, I really dig that kind of thing, but also a statement of literal fact that this person literally digs graves. Like maybe they are a grave digger. But also, there's so many topics of graves in here. In fact, I think half of the album has the word 6 feet under in it. There are just so many mentions of graves and tombs and headstones that it just seems like a really big concept album for such a dumb but effective, right? I don't want to say that it's not great. It's got a chuckle out of me, but it is also very campy, kind of dumb. And especially the delivery on it, right? We just got out of this maniacal screaming. It's all a race to nature's basement. I really dig graves. Oh my jeez. Oh man. I don't know if that's intentional or not. I mean, it has to be. But was the whole thing designed for this punchline? Did they craft this? Was the punchline the first thing? Like, what if we made an album with this punchline and then it got crafted from that angle? Because I could see some bands doing it. I don't know about this band. This band seems to be very serious. Um, it's almost an odd part of the track because of how seriously I take most of what's going on here. It's an oddity. It stands out as being one of the few comical lines. And that's not to say that there are no other comical lines, but I don't think that other lines feel so rooted in comedy. They don't feel like a joke. They just feel like they're comically stated or comically metaphored. This feels outright like, let's put a joke here. And that's what makes it feel a little off. But again, there's stuff I could be missing too. So I think that touches on everything. Is there anything I should go back on? I mean, pretty much everything I stated at the beginning continued through. I don't know that I necessarily need to showcase how they continue through, but the ideas of tension and release, contrast, tight drumming, great cymbal work, layered melodies, theatric vocals, blackened production. Yeah, I'd say that. See, it's interesting too, because I talked about how one of my notes here says that each song is different. They all have a separate emotional component to their non-metal sections, and that's still true. I still think of each of these songs as the feeling of it. Um, but at the same time, there's still this very strong through line between the core ideas that compose all of them, which is blackened metal and strong melody with non-metal instruments and sometimes bringing them together. And they just do a fantastic job from start to finish at having strong cohesion between not just moment to moment, but track to track, while also allowing each moment to moment to have its own identity and thus each track to have its own identity. It is a phenomenal execution here of finding that middle point between novelty and identity and synergy and making sure that everything works well together while still standing on its own feet. Just fantastic. Let's dive into the lyrics here. There's not too many on this one. I find my mind wandering aimless, weighted heavy by a mushroom cloud miasma of stolen micturations and rotting leaves, a mouth like a storm drain. Second time that storm drains have been brought up. Teeth caked with the soil and cast-offs of autumn, gargling through the slough of interrupted dreams. The color here is nondescript, leached. Yeah, leached of sense and purpose, heart riding shotgun in a hijacked hearse at the head of the serpent, the body's in the back, a lifetime on your back, piss and vinegar, a spirit dressing, more than happy to embrace the grave. Hmm. Yeah, these two stanzas right over my head. There's definitely, they're drenched in metaphor and kind of going over my head. But these two lines are a bit more direct, and I'm getting what they're doing. I just don't know how they relate to the story as a whole. We took all your used up gods out the back of Eden and did the decent thing. They're all gathered, shattered craniums draining, lolling tongues intone the grave mass. Among the filth and roots and sashaying worms befoul the feral carpet of the composing deity dance hall. It's a stateless carrion nosedive, all just a race to nature's basement. I really dig graves. So he decided to round up all the gods and shatter their craniums, as he states, and create a mass grave for the gods. Because, after all, It's always a race to nature's basement, which is another allusion to 6 Feet Under and graves, but this time not talking about humanity, but gods. Even even deities will eventually die. It's all a race to nature's basement. Um, but like the story here is this dude was mad at the ruling class and fought against them and died somehow and went to another plane of existence and decided to do the same. Went against the ruling class, except this time succeeded and ended up killing gods. Is that what's going on here? Like, that sounds, it's probably super simplified, but that's kind of what I got out of this, which is phenomenal. That it was easier to kill a bunch of gods than to take down human institutions. But, I mean, that kind of actually does make sense. I don't know. I don't know if any of this music actually lines up with the lyrics. Occasionally, I get some things like track 6, of course. It is such a perfect combination. But as I mentioned, given that a lot of the harsh vocals are done over black metal bits, aside from just the raw aggression, I don't know if there's any other emotive elements, especially when we look at the more melodic components that surround those black metal sections. There's no vocals to tie them together, so do they exist against the vocals that they replace? I don't know. That's part of that emotional resonance I think I was missing through a lot of this. The vocals are very one note until we get a different vocalist, and then there's a ton of synergy there between the music and the lyrics. Um, so yeah, I don't, like I said, I don't know if there is some combination here, if the music is completely divorced from the lyrical components outside of Taken by the Sea. But I really enjoyed this. I'm gonna have to listen to this again, which is bonkers because I'm pretty sure Forest of Stars is a black metal band. Even though I would not call this a black metal, would I? Proggy black metal, maybe? Definitely some modifier. It is not pure black metal. Uh, Anyways, those are my thoughts. My voice is starting to give. Those are my thoughts on A Forest of Stars. What is it called? Grave Mounds and Grave Mistakes. I don't know why I didn't realize that the double use of grave there. And he really digs graves. Oh my god. It's all over the place. It's everywhere. Um, Forest of Stars, Grave Mounds, and Grave Mistakes. This is where you guys come in. Hit me up with your comments. Let me know if you enjoyed this or not. Anything you'd like to add on to what I stated or correct me on. I had a couple of questions. If you can fill me in on those, greatly appreciated. Above the comment section is a description box, and in there is a link for Linktree. It takes you to this menu right here. It has links for everything related to the channel. You can support the channel through Patreon, pick up some merch, which also helps support the channel. Submit special selections, which also helps support the channel. And join the Discord and follow me on Twitter and email me and all sorts of stuff. Go ahead and check out the link. There's just a lot of stuff in there. Above that, if you could like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today. We'll be back tomorrow. Patrons, we have a live stream. And everyone else will be back on Monday. I will have the live stream link available Monday morning sometime, maybe Monday afternoon. And then, of course, Monday night. Well, Monday night for me, of course, EST anyways, 5 p.m. Actually, and 9 p.m. UTC. We will continue on with next week's theme. Until next time, remember to be critical but not cynical of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos. And this is how I control things.